Welcome to the Unconditionally Worthy podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Adia Gooden, a licensed clinical psychologist who believes deeply that you are worthy unconditionally. Hello, and welcome to episode 40 of the Unconditionally Worthy podcast. So I'm recording this at the end of January, and it is a super snowy and cold day in Chicago. I'm super grateful that I work from home and I don't have a commute and I don't have to be out in the snow, but definitely sending lots of love to everybody else who's experiencing winter right now, and especially those who have to commute and navigate this cold and the ice and all of those things. So I'm really excited about today's episode. I have Dr. Meag-gan O'Reilly as a guest, and it's really interesting because we have so many parallels for our career and our work. And I'm just so excited to have a conversation with another Black woman psychologist who focuses on self-worth. She talks about inherent value, who's worked with some really high achieving folks, and it's exciting to hear her take on self-worth, on the practices that support us in embracing our self-worth and inherent value. And so I know that you're going to get so much out of this conversation. We have so much alignment, and we also have some different perspectives. And so I think that this is just going to enrich your understanding of unconditional self-worth and what will help you embrace it. So tune in, listen to the end. As always, I'd be so grateful if you left a rating or review. That helps me to understand what's working and what we can improve about the podcast. And it also helps other listeners to find the podcast. So listen to the end, be sure to share it, and let us know what you think. Hello, I am so excited to introduce you all to Dr. Meag-gan O'Reilly. She is a licensed clinical psychologist, a self-worth expert, DEI consultant, and co-founder of Inherent Value Psychology Incorporated. She obtained her postdoctoral fellowship from Stanford University, where she served as a staff psychologist and coordinator of outreach and equity and inclusion for 6 years. Dr. Meag-gan created the first satellite clinic for Black undergraduate and graduate students that increased mental health access for Black students. Dr. Meag-gan is an adjunct faculty in the Stanford School of Medicine. She has taught classes on wellness as well as trained clinicians on social justice practice. Dr. Meag-gan is a creator and clinician of therapeutic healing circles for Black employees in partnership with companies such as Google, the San Francisco Ballet, and the United Negro College Fund STEM Scholars Program. These spaces provide coping and resistance skills to assist employees in thriving and not just surviving. In 2018, Dr. Meag-gan gave a TEDx talk to remind us that our lives, no matter how accomplished they are not dependent on our accomplishments. Her TEDx talk is Enough is Enough. The power of your inherent value can be seen, and it can be seen on YouTube. Her research and writings focus on social justice, and her areas of clinical expertise include high achiever stress, perfectionism, trauma, and social identities, particularly race, social class, and gender. So I'm super excited to welcome Dr. Meag-gan here. It's so funny because we have so many similarities. I received like a random email that was like, oh, there's somebody doing this training on, I think it was like cultural humility or cultural competency. And I was like, oh, I wonder who's doing the training. And so then it was Dr. Meag-gan. And so then I was like, well, let me Google her. And then we both did our TEDx talks in the same year. They're about very similar topics. Mine is about unconditional self-worth. Yours is about inherent value. Yeah. You worked at a counseling center at one of the top universities in the country for years. I worked at a counseling center at one of the top universities for several years. We both focused on supporting students from underrepresented groups. So it's just really funny sort of how aligned our career trajectories have been and our interests are. So it was super cool to connect with you. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with somebody else who spends a lot of time thinking about self-worth, thinking about
Mm.
inherent value, and also working with high achievers
Yeah.
and understands intimately like the challenges that high achieving folks experience. So welcome,
Definitely.
welcome, welcome to the podcast.
Overjoyed to be here. This is going to be one of the most synergetic conversations I've had all year. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to start our conversation as I start all of the conversations with my guests, and I'm going to ask you to share about your own self-worth journey.
It is so important to start with the self, especially as clinicians. We're so used to giving feedback and giving pearls, but I think our own journey is almost the most important in terms of this perspective. So I will start by saying it is ongoing, my self care journey. I don't want to give any pretense that I've arrived anywhere. It is definitely what I like to call lifespan work. I'm always deepening in that. But I think I will share that as a Black female with immigrant parents, still a new mom, I'm always getting messages. And in my early upbringing, targeted messages of lack, non belonging, messages that say I have to prove my intelligence, prove my beauty, prove my worth. And so, like most of us, I think I was in the camp of doing all the things that would help me belong and survive, straightening my hair, having a certain lexicon, just any of the things that I thought were the recipe for belonging and worth. Um, it was definitely college and studying psychology, but also key friendships along the way where people were a little bit more unapologetic and just more authentic, and really studying and learning that there isn't one way to be, right? In all of
Mm,
psychology. And then I really got into the literature and found that, the powers that be benefit from me thinking that I'm less deserving or unvaluable, because when I'm not in my power, I don't challenge power structures, right?
mm,
So I would say that I'm now in a place in my journey where it's not just intellectual, where I don't just know better and know that inherent value is a birthright and that we're all intrinsically worthy. I've been able to journey with other Black women, other people who have also been given messages of lack and that just refuse those and
mm,
step into their authenticity, can mirror each other's worth to each other. It's like sometimes we really need to hear from someone that, that mistake is okay, or I love you regardless, or there's still room for you here. Please take up space. So, really journeying with some tribes people, men and women, that can reflect that to me, grow me in that, and continuing just to kind of maintain, push back on some of my perfectionism. I like to say I'm a recovering perfectionist. Um, Kind of lovingly stepping into my procrastination and being able to say, what is this? What am I fearful of? And really treating myself as kindly and as intentionally as I do my clients and my loved ones.
mm. I love that you sort of talk about having models, right,
Yes.
of peers or people that you sort of interact with or witness being their
Mhm.
full selves as an inspiration for you to be your full self. And I also like how you connect owning your worth or your inherent value to you being able to speak truth to power or
Yes.
challenge power structures and systems. I think so often people fear that embracing their unconditional self-worth or believing they're inherently valuable means that they're just like navel gazing and just going to be
Mm.
selfish for the rest of their lives. And I really
Mhm.
like to emphasize, as you touched on, that actually embracing our unconditional self-worth helps us to show up in the world in a very powerful way, right? And helps us to do what we are here to do. It doesn't hinder that, it empowers
Mhm.
that.
Yes. And I've always been curious about that. Like, why do we think what messages? Because I'm always like, who gave me this message and how are they benefiting from it? But like, who
Mm,
told us that self-worth would be inherently like self-focused? I've actually found the exact opposite. When we are loving and kind to ourselves, this huge gratitude and humanity opens up, because then we're like, I'm no different, no better, no worse. And everyone is out here trying to do their best, and we can actually do this thing together. So I actually think it makes us more connected, more
mhm,
intentional, and more able to be compassionate with others and kind of journey together. So it's actually the opposite than, being selfish.
I agree. And I think, the other thing that I'm sure, I know as a therapist, I'm sure and have seen is that when people are depressed and anxious, I think especially depressed, it's very self-focused. I mean, even if you're just beating yourself up, right? It's not self-focused as in I'm the greatest. It's I'm the worst and I'm awful and I'm horrible and right? Like people close in on themselves when they're struggling with depression. The world feels like it's about them. It's happening to them and it's awful. And it really keeps people from expanding outward and opening up and connecting. And I think that a lot of people confuse believing that you're worthy, affirming your worth with self-indulgence, with lack of accountability, with thinking I'm just the best and arrogance. And because we have a lot of models of that, right? A lot of models of arrogance, right? A lot of models of self-indulgence, a lot of models of I'm the winner, you're the loser. People think that that's what it means to believe that you are unconditionally worthy, because I don't think we have great models for what we are talking about, which is this nuanced confidence, affirming ourselves while also believing everybody else is worthy too. It's not I'm worthy and you are not. It's not I'm better and you are worse. It's wow, I'm touching into my unconditional self-worth and I believe that about you too. And so how do I show up in that? And how do I empower you to show up in that as well?
There's room enough for all of us. What you just spoke about is so steeped in that scarcity mindset, that zero sum.
Yes.
If I have some, you must have none or less. When it's not, it's just a completely different game. There's room enough for all of us to be worthy.
Yes. So I guess it's on us to keep sort of like talking about this and modeling and sort of helping people to understand the power in this work. And so, with that, I'd love for you to share your definition. Like, how do you define inherent value? How do you define self-worth, right? The listeners of the podcast, if they've been listening for a while, have heard me talk about it a lot, but I'd love to hear your take, how you frame these things for yourselves, for your clients, for the people that you work with.
I love this because there are so many different perspectives and there's a lot of self terms, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-efficacy. And I like to put it in a little bit more of a narrative term because we learn with our heart as much as we do with our head. So I like to say that the most important story that you'll ever hear is the one you tell you about yourself. That's kind of my gateway into understanding self-worth. And then I hit it with a little bit more of a kind of intellectual definition, which is self-worth is your appraisal of your value in the social marketplace where these things are being exchanged. It's how you estimate your right to belong, your right to have good things happen to you, and your worthiness to receive affection. It's kind of the global and thus most important opinion you have about yourself. And I love this definition because I've seen self-worth worth wounds show up in all these areas: belonging, romantic relationships, allowing good things to happen to us. Like, oh, this isn't for me, this is somebody else, right? We kind of shrink and dim our shine. So it touches all these areas of life.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you combine sort of both how people see themselves, how people feel in relationship with others, and what people are sort of willing to accept or receive from other people. And I agree. So often when people struggle with low self-worth or feelings of unworthiness, there's a sense that I don't deserve good things. So either I expect bad things, and then when they come, I say, yep, this is what I expected. This is what I deserve. Or I expect bad things and good things come and I say, what is this? I'm not comfortable with that. I don't deserve this. When's the other shoe going to drop? I can't accept this. It's too vulnerable, right? And so then that creates a situation where it's really hard to enjoy life if you're not letting in the good.
Oh, you touched my heart. I see this every day. And it's this cultivation of how to lovingly step into that and expand and open it.
Yeah. Well, let's sort of talk more about like what you see in your work
Mhm.
with clients, in your work with facilitating groups, right? So you worked at Stanford University for years. I
Mhm.
went to Stanford for undergrad. That's another sort of like
You know.
interesting
Mhm.
paths crossing thing. I mean, I wasn't at Stanford when you were there. I was
Mhm.
at
I
Stanford
wish.
a while before, but I understand it is a culture of high achievement, right? So one of the things that people used to say about us as Stanford students, or we used to say, was that we were like ducks on a lake. So
Yes.
on the top, everybody looked cool and calm and collected, and I've got it all together. And underneath, everybody's like, like paddling their legs and like, oh my gosh, can I get it together? Can I keep it together?
Frantic.
Like, it's just like this
Yes.
overwhelm, right? And so you worked at Stanford. You've also facilitated, groups
Mhm.
and work with a lot of people in the tech industry, right? In the Bay Area. So, people who are working at some of these major tech companies who are also very high achievers. And,
Mhm.
I'd love for you to share like what
Mm.
happens? What do you see happens when people derive their sense of worth from academic achievement, from job performance, job achievement? Like, what have you seen in
Mhm.
your work with these high achievers?
Ah, quite a few things. And the first thing I'll say is that they've been, thinking that their worth comes from what they know or what they can do for a while. By the
Mm,
time someone gets to Stanford, they think they're winning the game. They are
mm,
locked in and steeped in this mindset. So that's number one. And they get really good at it, right? They're kind of
mhm,
experts at this conditional worth game. So, number one, they don't even know they're playing this game, right? And then something happens, right? Either a first back set or a failure or a misstep. And then they begin to see how fragile this whole thing was. I like to say, and I tell my clients, if your identity is held up by one pillar and that one pillar
mm,
gets to quake, and then this whole thing can come down. Their self worth is teetering on this one
mm,
definition. So something happens or they transition into a new role. We know that imposter feelings love to kind of creep up when we're having to prove. We feel like we need to prove ourselves in a new identity or new role or new job title. And so they go through these cyclic cycles of ceaselessly striving, attaining
mm,
something, and feeling temporarily satiated. But the truth is, this type of outside of yourself self worth is really insatiable. It is,
mhm,
we know about this thing called adaptation level phenomenon. You tell yourself, I just want this thing, this fellowship, this grant, this position. You get it, and then you habituate, and you just need this next thing to feel good and enough.
mhm,
And it just this hedonic treadmill of pursuing, pursuing, pursuing. So they're either caught in that and getting burnt out, or they get a first setback and their whole world is becoming to crack and fall around them. And I call that a very opportunistic crisis. It's very,
mm,
it's actually advantageous because that's
mm,
the one chance in this breakneck speed that we might get to lift the veil and start the process of becoming internally validating and actually seeing where our value has been coming from all along that we haven't been investing in or didn't notice.
mm. Yeah, I love so much of what you said. I think sometimes even just getting to that job or that school creates the crisis because you
Mm.
went from I was the best in my class to everybody was the best in their class. And I'm no longer standing out in the ways that I stood out before. I'm no longer receiving that validation that I got from so many teachers and, everybody because I was the best. And even that can create a crisis and a feeling like I'm not worthy. And I also love that you sort of frame this as an opportunity, right? That
Yes.
so many people feel like, okay, my world is crumbling, right? I'm falling apart. This is awful. And I love the framing of this is actually an opportunity to look at your worthiness beyond this one pillar, as you said, beyond this achievement. And that some of us don't get that opportunity until something goes awry. Because as
Yes.
long as we're on that achievement track and we just keep doing it and keep doing it, we may get exhausted, we may get frustrated, we may not
Mhm.
be happy. But if we can kind of keep churning it out and keep doing it, we may not examine the fact that it really isn't working for us on a deep
Yes.
level.
Yes. And we all just went through a forced pause. I mean, COVID
Mm,
came in and a lot of people got unemployed. A lot of my graduate students could no longer do their research. Like I have people in the
mm,
bioscience where they're dealing with living organisms. And if they can't go into the lab, years of research,
yeah.
right? So we all just went through this collective pause where every hour in therapy, I was like, how can we use this? What's the lesson? Let's grieve and mourn and build again. And so I hope we can hold on to that as this continues to stretch.
Yeah, I love that. I've thought about that too over the course of this pandemic is sort of like what happens when a lot of the things that used to sort of make you feel worthy or distract you
Mhm.
from how you really feel
Mhm.
about yourself and your life are stripped away. Right?
Yes.
Like you can't just stay busy all the time and go to this and 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 this, right? Like, and so then what happens when you're at home? and
Yes.
and you don't have that busy sense that gives you a sense of I'm purposeful, I'm important, right? And what does that look like to examine yourself and your life and reflect on it in that space, right? In the
Mhm.
absence of those structures and the busyness and the all that stuff that we used to fill our lives with.
Yes. Yes. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. You also do a lot of work with people of color, with Black people
Yes.
specifically. And
Mhm.
I think that there are some important intersections. I like to think about Black people asserting, affirming, embracing our unconditional self worth as something that is radical
Yes.
because it
Mm.
counters the messages of society, right?
Mhm.
It says, yeah, you may say that I'm worthless. You may
Mhm.
say that I'm not worthy of love, of care, of respect, but
Mhm.
that isn't true. And I'm going to treat myself differently.
Mhm.
But I think
Mhm.
the risk, the challenge is that it's really easy for people to internalize
Mhm.
microaggressions and discrimination. And I wonder in your work, right, with people of color, with Black people specifically, like, how do you support people in navigating all of this? And what are some of the impacts that you see of people, of Black people being in predominantly white spaces where they're not always affirmed as worthy?
Yes. Yeah. You're right on it because all of us can use the message of self worth. However, if you are not a young, able bodied, English speaking, heterosexual white
Mm,
male that's from a Judeo Christian spirituality, you have been bombarded by messaging of being not enough. And so that's why I love to center the Black community because the goal of oppression and trauma is to diminish the self, right?
mm,
Is to have us take ourselves out of the running because we don't feel belonging or worthy. So discrimination and microaggressions. I think it's a misnomer of saying it micro because it's relentless and it can be macro at times as well. But both of these forces can really have us thinking that we're wrong instead of the system, or we're doing something wrong,
mm,
or we need to adapt and assimilate. And I remember speaking with some of my Latinx colleagues and Native colleagues, and assimilation is a type of violence.
mm,
Oftentimes, it requires you to amputate a part of the self or to leave behind a part of the self, be it your language or your
mm.
culture or how loud you laugh or what you wear, right?
Mhm.
We're always self policing and self monitoring and contorting ourselves to fit. And that is a type of double consciousness that really does move us away from our authentic self. And if we get too good at that, we won't even recognize ourselves.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
it's this erosion that can do untold harm internally, emotionally.
Mm.
Mm.
How do you help people cope with that?
Yes. Well, I name it. I really name the backdrop and the gears working behind them. And that is not just a simple thing. It really is revolutionary when they can see that, oh, this is not something I have to do. This is something I've
Mm.
been doing out of survival. And so now I can give myself compassion. It's not something I'm failing at. The system is actually failing me. And then
Mhm.
we can get about the work of if I don't have to do this, what else is available to me? What feels better? What lights me up? Who lights me up? And what are the things I can actually put my energies in that give back to me? Black
Mm-hmm.
people in predominantly white spaces have this, the code switching, the double lexicon, the whitewashing that is double duty. They're at work, but they've also
Mm-hmm.
clocked into assimilation, right? And so that's just so much to take off on the end of the day. So if you're not doing that, how can we step into our unapologetic self, even in the work corporate space? That's where I do a lot of my work, and not fear for our jobs and not fear for, our relationships, not be called intimidating. Well, we can't control how other people receive us, but we have to
Mm-hmm.
focus on how we want to move through the world in a way that's edifying. So it's a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
empowerment.
I love
hmm
that. And, I think one of the things that I tend to talk to people about is there may be situations where you do have to code shift,
hmm
right? Where you have learned that you may be punished, right? Because there are these messages are not made up, right? And the
Yes,
discrimination and the racism and the bias are not
they're real.
false, right? And so I
hmm
think about like it is useful to be honest that if you're going to stay in this corporate environment and
hmm
maybe a particular team is more or less accepting, that you may have to shift. And I agree that naming it is so important. And then
hmm
making a conscious choice to say, okay, in this space, because these people have these biases, I am choosing to
hmm
show up in this way and not in that way, to protect myself, to whatever. And then when it's conscious and it's
hmm
not about there's something wrong with how I authentically communicate, but there's something wrong with these people and this system and their view of how I authentically communicate, then it sort of feels more like there's agency and choice
Yeah.
versus there's something wrong with my authentic communication and I have to do this or I have to change, not just communicate in a different way, but change who I am in
hmm
order to be good enough to be in this space.
You're exactly right. The discernment is so huge because I like to tell people whose opinions actually matters, right?
Mm,
And then you get to toggle and attenuate, how am I going to show up here with my agency and empowerment and choice? And how am I not, right? Because not everyone's opinions matter, even at work, right? We get to be
yes.
strategic on how we show up and how we maneuver. So I'm with you 100%.
Yeah. And I think, we can connect this back to knowing that you're worthy, knowing your inherent value, because when your sense of worthiness isn't at stake,
Mm.
it becomes much less important that everybody likes you and that
Yeah.
everybody thinks you're amazing and that everybody approves of you and everybody always feels comfortable around you,
Ah,
right? Like,
mhm.
I know for me, I've always been an outspoken person. I like just couldn't stop, even if I
Mhm.
wanted to. But I think the more I embraced my worthiness, the less concerned I was with everybody liking me or me always
Mhm.
having to make everybody comfortable. And I think
Mhm.
often Black people are socialized in particular to make sure that white people feel comfortable, in part because it's a safety measure. Because if white
Yes.
people feel uncomfortable, they often can interpret that as I'm in danger. And then there can be
Mhm.
a real big problem. And so we can be
Mhm.
socialized to feel like I've got to make sure everybody always feels comfortable around me.
Mhm.
But as
Mhm.
I've known that I'm worthy, it's like, all right, like if they get, I'm not going around trying to offend people, right? Or
Yes.
being rude. But there's a sense of like, if I'm communicating authentically
Mhm.
and I'm being myself and I'm being honest and somebody has a problem with that, well, then that's their problem. Like
Yes.
I'm okay with them being uncomfortable with what I said. If it's the truth and if it's honest, then that's their issue to deal with because they don't like it.
I
Right.
said what
And
I
so
said.
as
Mhm.
you embrace your worthiness, you get less concerned with people pleasing and approval from others because so often that is a drive to prove your worth. And when we are caught up in people pleasing, then we feel like we need to twist ourselves into pretzels to be
Mm.
approved of, to be affirmed, to be shown as worthy. The irony is that when people love you as a pretzel and not as yourself, you still don't really feel accepted. Because you're like, well, they
100%.
only love me because I'm twisted into a pretzel, right? So it really doesn't do what you want it to do. But when you start to affirm yourself, affirm your worth, that's what empowers you to show up as your full self without the fear and the anxiety. And you may feel a little uncomfortable. That might be normal. But the fear and anxiety that if this person doesn't like me, that's the end of the world.
Yes. I know so many contortionists, so many pretzel people. You're exactly right. Yeah, and it's still unfulfilling. And that's my biggest sell, right? If you start the precedent, you start the relationship, the job role, whatever, the way you want to continue, not only is it less work, but it's your best litmus test. You get to discern
Yes.
who's going to be in your tribe and who just isn't. You don't need everyone's endorsement, right? And so becoming more self-validating, only leaning into the people whose opinions matter. I'm talking core people, just one or two wingmen and women, then you can start to feel so much more secure and less fragile on the whims of other people's needs and opinions.
Yes, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as we sort of get ready to wrap up, I'd love for you to share what are the practices? What are the mindset shifts that you share with the people that you work with as you're supporting them in claiming their inherent value, in believing, right? Because we know as psychologists, believing that we're inherently valuable or unconditionally worthy is more than just like, you should just believe it.
Yes.
Like, it doesn't work that way, right?
I'll get right on that. Yeah.
It's like, okay, great. Thanks for telling me. So I'd love for you to just share what nuggets of wisdom, what practices do you offer to the clients that you work with around this?
Yes. And I would definitely call them practices because they need to be touched more than once. And a lot of them are behaviors, things that we need to do and to feel ourselves into the experience. So, and a lot of them are uncomfortable as well. So the first couple are the 3 S's: silence, stillness, and solitude. All of these are lost arts in our society as it is, right? So silence means, filter out all the noise, all the messages from upbringing, all the critical voices, all the social media. Like, get silent around and just try to find your own voice. A lot of us don't really know what is our own opinion, our thought, or voice. Stillness is hard for my fast-paced tech people and just high achievers because part of that doing is being still enough to look. So I actually sometimes give the homework of do nothing for 5 full minutes. And they're like, what does that mean? You want me to be journaling? I'm like, no, literally nothing. Like, sit stilly and find out what happens. And then solitude, kind of retreat a little bit, in any faith tradition and a lot of our wellness practices, we always see a leader retreat into solitude to be with self. And that is a very core self-worth activity because you're saying, I'm worthy of being with just me, no one else and nothing else, right? So I'm going to honor this time with the self because someone is here too that is worth attending to. So silence, stillness, solitude. Then I also like to say, kind of get in touch with the learner mindset. A lot of high achievers always feel like they should know it already or should be excelling at it. So the learner mindset means, what can I do that I'm not good at, seek that out, and that is not going to show up on my resume. Kind of let me get in touch with my unresume self. What hobby can I pick up or new area can I look into where I'm inherently going to not be great at it and just love myself through that uncomfortableness. And so when I find myself in a new area again, maybe in my job or relationship, I kind of know what it's like to be new and to be loving in myself as I grow into something. We've forgotten how to grow. We just want to be bearing fruit all the time. But seeds need time to germinate. So kind of teaching people how to do that. And then lastly, do something for its own sake, just because it brings you joy, not because of the outcome or the product or the advancement or if it's going to look shiny to someone, but just because you enjoy it, like learning how to cultivate joy as a gift to self, because that's how another way we can show that I'm deserving of time, I'm deserving of joy, and really show up for ourselves.
I love that. I think, when you talk about the silence, stillness, and solitude, I think about, helping people connect to who they be more than what they do. And so often we get into this human doing mode. And it's like these practices are saying, just be. And it's uncomfortable, but just be and see what comes up and connect to the part of you that isn't about the doing, the productivity, the output. Right. And, when I hear like the learner mindset, it's like, can you be with yourself in the process? That it doesn't just have to be the outcome, I got an award, right? And as you said, so many high achievers, right? Since they were 5, right? They have been on this achievement path, right? The trophies, the awards, the this, the that, right? And so, how do you one, get uncomfortable with it's okay to not know? It's okay to not be great at it. And can you be with yourself in that process? And so it just feels like these practices, and then also the cultivating joy, so that the joy you feel isn't just about you received a superlative or an affirmation or a raise, and you experience that joy for maybe a month, but probably shorter. But that you do things just for fun, because play and fun and joy, that's what makes life enjoyable. And I think so many of us put that off and say, okay, well, when I retire, then I'll do something just for fun. Or when I take one vacation a year, then I will be able to have fun, but sort of like actively saying, no, right now, you deserve it. Right now, you're worthy of it. Right now, you don't have to earn it. You don't have to wait for it. You don't have to put it off. So I love these practices that you're offering, and really hope that the listeners will try it out, right? Like try out some of these practices. I think they're incredibly valuable. And let us know if you try them, tag us, let us know what comes up. We'd love to hear about it. And then with that, I'm sure that the listeners are going to want to continue to see and hear what you're putting out into the world and to stay in touch. So will you share how people can stay in touch with you moving forward?
Yes, I am updating my website right now, so I'll hold off on that until it's new, but going to have some courses on there, detangling worth from work, things like that, silencing the inner critic. But right now, I think Insta is the best way. So at Dr. Meag-gan, and Meag-gan is spelled Meaggan. It's a little of my signature there. And so Insta is the best way to keep in touch, see what I'm up to, DM me, and follow along for the website updates.
Awesome. And we'll have all of that linked in the show notes. And if this episode may come out by the time your website is done. So if this episode is out by that time, it's probably going to come out in March.
Going to be drmeaggan.com.
So drmeaggan.com, and we'll make sure that that's linked in the show notes. So thank you so much, Meag-gan, for taking your time to share with us your wisdom and your insights. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I know that the listeners will get so much out of it.
Oh, thank you for your mentorship of me and reflecting my worth back to me. So I appreciate you.